Arash remembered the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was strange. A trembling, broken sound, like the river itself was gasping for breath. He didn't know it yet, but he was hearing the beginning of the end of his entire civilization. Mohenjo-Daro, the great city of the Indus, was waking up under the warm, amber sun. Merchants opened stalls, cattle wandered through the streets, and the smell of baked brick filled the air. Everything looked normal, but nothing was normal anymore. The river had shrunk again. The fishing boats rested on dry mud. Children whispered that the gods had turned their faces away. Adults spoke in quiet, worried tones, always glancing toward the horizon as if expecting something terrible to arrive. Arash climbed to the rooftop of his family's home, his favorite place in the entire world. From there, he could see the city's perfect grid of streets, the public baths, the wells, the bright crowds flowing like water through the morning light. And he watched her, Mira. She came every morning to fetch water from the well, her bangles chiming softly with every step. Arash had never found the courage to speak to her, but he promised himself one day he would write her name on a clay seal in the sacred signs of the Indus, so the gods would never forget her. Today, he tried to wave, but Mira did not look up. She seemed distracted. Her father stood beside her, whispering with urgency. Their faces were tense. Arash's heart tightened. In the marketplace, traders shouted, but not in the usual rhythm of business. They argued, accused, blamed the river, blamed the gods, blamed each other. No caravans had arrived this week. The boats stopped coming. The storerooms were half empty. The city that once never slept felt suddenly tired. Arash ran to his father's workshop. Rows of clay seals, symbols of merchants, animals, gods, lay untouched. No one wanted to trade. No one wanted to buy. The world was closing in. His father's hands trembled as he shaped wet clay. Not from age, from fear. Arash asked him why the river was dying, why the traders were angry, why the city felt so fragile. His father looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Something is leaving us, Arash, and once it leaves, it will never return." Days passed. More families packed their belongings and left. Street by street, house by house, life drained from the city like water from a cracked jar. The public baths closed, the wells dried, the drains clogged with silt. The grand city, the pride of the Indus, became an echo. And then Arash saw Mira again. Her family was leaving. Her hair was tied in a travel braid. Her eyes were red. A single clay pot hung from her shoulder. Arash finally found the courage to speak. He rushed toward her, heart pounding. "Mira, will you come back?" She paused, looked at him with a softness he had never seen before. The kind of look that says goodbye before the words are spoken. "No," she whispered. "No one will come back." Her bangles chimed one last time as she walked into the rising dust. The city emptied, doors left open, wells abandoned, wind whistling between walls where children once laughed. Arash climbed the rooftop again, the same place where he dreamed of writing Mira's name. But today, he saw only silence. The city that once pulsed with life now lay still as a tomb. He didn't know where everyone went. He didn't know why the river betrayed them. He didn't know why a civilization so advanced could crumble without a single battle. But he knew one thing. He would remember. Because one day, 4,000 years later, someone would walk through these ruins and wonder who the Indus people were, what they dreamed of, whom they loved, how they lived, how they vanished. and Arash wanted them to know that his world was real, that Mira was real, that the people of the Indus were not ghosts or myths. They were alive. They laughed. They loved. They dreamed. Until the day the river fell silent and the empire disappeared without a sound. Arash walked through Mohenjo-Daro with the feeling that he was walking through the heart of a giant that still breathed, but weaker each day. Once, the city felt invincible. Every brick, every street, every drain was placed with purpose, as if the gods themselves had measured the world with a ruler and a compass. But now, something was slipping. He passed the houses lined in perfect rows. He used to love counting them, pretending he could understand why everything fit together so perfectly. His father told him that order kept the people united, that as long as the city stood straight, so would its people. But today, Arash noticed something new. Cracks. Tiny ones at first, barely visible. But once he saw them, he couldn't unsee them. A wall leaning just a little too far, a drain clogged with silt, a house door left open because its owners had already gone. He reached the artisan quarter, normally alive with the clang of metal and the rhythm of carving tools. Today, the sounds were broken, fragmented, like a song sung off-key. A potter stared at an unfinished bowl as if he no longer remembered what he was trying to create. A bead maker dropped a tiny stone, then didn't bother to pick it up. Arash swallowed hard. He wanted to shout, "Don't you see? We can fix this. We can rebuild. We can stay." But his voice stayed silent. He walked on. At the great bath, he used to play with the other children. They pretended the bath was a sacred ocean where heroes swam and gods listened. Now the water was still, thin, dusty. The echo of their laughter hung in the air like a ghost. A man stood near the edge, staring into the basin as if it were an oracle. Arash asked him softly, "Why is everyone leaving?" The man did not turn, did not blink. "They think the river will return," he said. "They think the city will heal itself." "And won't it?" Arash whispered. The man closed his eyes. "No." That one word felt heavier than stone. Arash walked on, his sandals scraping against the sun-baked road. He stopped at a well where women used to chat, sing, tell stories. Now, only one bucket hung there, swinging in the wind like a lonely heartbeat. Even the air felt emptier. Finally, Arash climbed the granary stairs. He always loved this place, the highest view in the city. From here, Mohenjo-Daro unfolded beneath him like a map drawn by the universe. He saw the perfect grid of streets, the quiet rooftops, the shadowed courtyards, the channels carved with precision, the homes aligned like constellations, the bath shimmering faintly under dust, the horizon broken only by the thin, dying thread that used to be the river. He felt a sting in his chest, not from fear, not from anger, from grief. The city wasn't just losing people, it was losing its soul. His father's words echoed again. "Something is leaving us." Arash whispered back, voice trembling. "Yes, I see it now." He felt the wind push against his face, hot and restless, carrying the dry scent of dust and the bitter taste of a future he didn't want to imagine. Perfection was collapsing, not with a crash, not with war, but with silence. And Arash understood something that no child should ever understand. Even the strongest cities can die quietly. Arash always loved the seals. To him, they were not just clay and symbols. They were magic. Little pieces of the world preserved forever. At least he believed that. Until the day one broke. It happened in his father's workshop. Arash was carving a new seal, a deer for Mira, when he heard a sharp crack. His father froze. A seal lay shattered on the floor. Arash had never seen his father look afraid, not until that moment. His father knelt, touching the broken pieces as if they were bones. The symbols, once so confident, were fractured, unreadable. Arash whispered, "What does it mean?" His father answered softly, "Even memory can break." That terrified Arash more than anything, because he knew the seals were all they had. No books, no scrolls, no long stories carved in stone. Only tiny signs on fragile clay, trying to hold an entire world. And now, even those were cracking. Arash looked at his father's trembling hands. A man who had carved symbols all his life suddenly seemed unsure how to hold them together. "Can we fix it?" Arash asked. His father did not answer. He placed the broken pieces on a shelf with the others that had shattered recently. There were many, too many. Arash felt something twisting in his chest, a desperate urgency. If the seals broke, the stories broke. If the stories broke, the people broke. If the people broke, the world forgot them. He grabbed a lump of fresh clay and pressed it hard. Too hard. The image distorted. He tried again. And again. Each attempt worse than the last. His hands shook. The clay slipped from his fingers. Tears blurred his vision. "I don't want us to disappear," he whispered. His father finally spoke. His voice low, tired, filled with something Arash had never heard before. Sadness. "We will disappear, Arash. Everything does. But leave something behind, even if it's small, even if no one understands it. Leave something." Arash breathed in the scent of clay and dust and fear. He picked up the broken seal. The crack across it looked like a lightning bolt, sudden, final. He pressed it against his palm, the broken edges imprinting sharply into his skin. The pain grounded him. Outside, the city sighed again, walls shifting, wind whispering through empty streets, the river murmuring its slow retreat. Arash stepped outside. He held the cracked seal up to the fading light, and the sun lit the fracture like a glowing wound. He whispered Mira's name into the wind. The symbols did not speak back, but the wind carried the sound away. And Arash wondered if this was what forgetting felt like. A broken seal, a fading voice, a boy standing in a dying city trying to hold on to a language the world would never read. He lifted his chin. "No," he said quietly. "I will not disappear." But as the sky darkened and the river withdrew further and the silence deepened, Arash felt the truth press against him like the broken seal in his hand. Sometimes even those who fight to be remembered can vanish without a trace. The fall began quietly, so quietly that at first no one noticed. A few families left, then a few more. Then whole streets emptied like water draining from a cracked bowl. Arash didn't understand how fast it was happening until one morning he woke to the sound of footsteps. Not the usual rhythm of people starting their day, but the heavy, dragging sound of departure. He ran outside. Neighbors loaded carts. Children clung to mothers. Men argued, pointing toward the horizon, toward the shrinking river. Arash saw a woman kneel beside her doorway, touch the threshold, and whisper a farewell. The gesture broke something in him. Homes weren't made of clay and brick. They were made of memories. And this city was losing them all at once. He rushed to the well. Only dust waited at the bottom. He climbed the granary steps. Rats scurried through empty bins. He ran through the artisan quarter. The furnaces were cold, tools abandoned. The beadmaker's stall stood silent, the tiny stones scattered like the remains of a shattered dream. Arash wanted to shout to tell them all to stay, to remind them of the order, the beauty, the perfection. But no one listened. No one looked back, not even the wind. It only carried more dust. By midday, the streets were ghosts. The echoes of the city, the laughter, the markets, the clatter of life, were replaced by a single sound: silence. A silence so heavy, Arash felt it pressing on his chest. He went home, hoping to find comfort, but even his house felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, as if the walls knew something he didn't. His father sat beside the door, looking older than he ever had, lines etched deeper, eyes dimmer. Arash whispered, "Is this the end?" His father took a long breath. "The river fed us," he said. "It guided us, protected us. But when the river changes its path, so must we." Arash stared at him. "No, we can stay. We can fix things. We can rebuild." His father placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "There is nothing left to rebuild." The words struck harder than any blow, harder than the silent streets, harder than the empty wells, harder than Mira leaving. The truth finally reached him. The city wasn't dying. It was already dead. And he, a boy holding on to memories, was its last heartbeat. Later, Arash walked toward the edge of the city, where the river used to roar, where boats once arrived with treasures and stories. Now, only cracked mud stretched before him, rippling in dry patterns like the skin of a dying giant. He knelt and pressed his palm into the ground. It was warm, but lifeless. Suddenly, the earth trembled. Just for a moment, a faint shudder. Not an earthquake, more like a sigh, as if even the land was letting go. Arash looked up at the sky. The sun glowed weakly through a haze of dust. A stillness hung over the city like a blanket too heavy to lift. He whispered, voice shaking, "Please, don't leave me too." But the world did not answer. Behind him, a final group was leaving. Families, farmers, artisans, their footsteps fading into the vast plain. Arash was alone. The city, once perfect, once vibrant, once alive, now stood silent like a monument to the gods' forgotten experiment. A civilization that rose without kings, without war, without monuments, was falling now without fire, without screams, without a single battle. Just an endless, heartbreaking, quiet departure. And Arash stood in the middle of it all, a boy trying to hold on to a world that no longer existed. Years later, people whispered about the city that vanished. Some said the desert swallowed it whole. Others claimed the gods turned away, taking the people with them. A few believed the river betrayed them, changing its path like a living creature leaving its children behind. Arash listened to all the stories as he wandered across barren plains with the cracked seal in his hand, like a heartbeat he refused to let die. He was older now, but not older in years, older in grief. He walked through villages far from home, where strangers spoke of tremors and quakes that split the earth and sent rivers fleeing underground. He heard whispers of drought, of monsoons that never came, of fields that withered until even the insects fled. One night, by a dying fire, a traveler told him, the Indus didn't fall. It was abandoned by the sky. Arash stared into the flames, hearing Mira's bangles in the crackling fire. He could almost see her walking away again, the image so sharp that it stole his breath. But the most painful moment came not from strangers, but from the remains of home. He returned to Mohenjo-Daro long after everyone left. The streets were dust. The houses caved inward like bodies curling in on themselves. But the worst was the workshop. His father's tools were gone. Only one thing remained on the shelf where he kept the broken seals. A message. Not a written message. The Indus had no words for that. Instead, a symbol pressed into a clay tablet and left to dry. A hand. Open. Empty. Arash stared at it for a long time, his pulse pounding. He knew this was no merchant mark. He knew this was no animal symbol. This was his father's farewell. His father had left him the silence shaped into a final sign. Arash pressed his palm to the symbol. The clay crumbled. The print shattered. The farewell broke apart in his hand. And that was when he realized the cruelest truth. Even goodbyes don't last forever. He sank to the ground, hands shaking, trying to fit the broken pieces back together. But they turned to powder in his fingers, like the memories he struggled to hold. That night, he slept inside the ruined workshop, curled among broken seals and ghosts. Why did our city die? A child would ask him years later. Arash would look at them, eyes tired but still searching, and place the cracked seal on the table. It didn't die, he said softly. It scattered. Where? The child asked. Arash smiled, a smile weighted with dust and heartbreak. Into the people who left, into the ones who remember, into the ones who still ask why. He closed his eyes and whispered, almost to himself, and some pieces, into the ones who carry pain. The fire burned low. The desert wind howled beyond the walls. The Indus was gone. But the scar it left was alive, and perhaps that was its truest legacy. Years passed. Seasons blurred. Empires rose in the west and fell in the east. New languages were born. New gods worshipped. New borders carved in blood. But Arash kept walking. Sometimes he followed rivers. Sometimes he followed stories. Sometimes he followed only the wind. And slowly, he began to notice something he had never understood before. The world remembered the Indus in ways the people did not. In a remote village in the foothills, a potter made bowls in the same shape as those from Mohenjo-Daro. Curved, simple, perfect. He had never seen the city, yet his hands repeated its memory. In another settlement, children played a game with lines in the dirt. The same pattern Arash once played with Mira near the riverbank. The rules were different now, but the rhythm was the same. He met a storyteller who spoke of ancient cities swallowed by silence long before the time of kings. He described the Great Bath, the wide streets, the wells, details no one should remember. Arash asked him, "How do you know these stories?" The storyteller shrugged. "They were old when my grandfather learned them." And in that moment, Arash felt something shift, something profound. A civilization does not die when buildings fall or rivers change course. It dies when people stop remembering. And the world, despite distance and time, still remembered, even if it did not know the name. One day, Arash reached a marketplace crowded with travelers from distant lands. He watched them bargain, laugh, share water, speak different tongues, but understand each other. For the first time since leaving Mohenjo-Daro, he felt a strange warmth, not the heat of the sun, but recognition. A merchant noticed the cracked seal in his hand and asked, "What symbol is that?" Arash hesitated. Then he answered, "A language." "A language," the merchant echoed. "But it's so small." Arash smiled. All great languages start small. He turned the seal over in his palm. The fracture glowed faintly as light caught the uneven edges. He thought of the city, of Mira, of his father, of the final symbol, of the dust, of the silence, of the survivors scattering like seeds. And he whispered, "Some languages are not meant to be read, only carried." Years later, he would sit near another fire, surrounded by faces new and curious. They would ask him again, "What was your city like?" He would answer differently each time, not because he lied, but because memory changes, just like rivers. Sometimes he described streets shimmering with heat, lined with artisans shaping clay. Sometimes he described the sound of bathwater echoing in huge chambers. Sometimes he described the scent of baked bread, the rhythm of drums, the laughter of children. But he always ended with the same words. It was a city that lived in harmony with the earth, and the earth changes. So the city did too. The people nodded. The fire crackled. Stars wheeled above them in ancient patterns no civilization could claim. Arash leaned back, closed his eyes, and felt the world breathing around him. The Indus was gone. And yet, somewhere in the wind, he heard Mira's laugh again, soft, distant, like an echo drifting through time. And he understood, nothing is ever truly lost, not if someone remembers. Arash grew old. He did not notice it at first. Age has a way of arriving quietly, not in the body, but in the pauses between breaths. His hair silvered like the sands along the dried riverbed. Lines formed around his eyes, carved not by time, but by memories. He walked slower now, leaned more heavily on his staff, and listened longer before he spoke. People respected him for that. He traveled far from the places of his youth, across mountains, across rivers, across deserts that shifted like dreams. But one day, without deciding, his feet carried him back to the Indus, back to the land he once called home. The city was dust, but the wind still flowed through its bones. Arash stood where the main gate once stood. There was no gate anymore, only shadows and silence. But he bowed his head as if entering a sacred place. He walked the empty street, his steps soft on the sand. He could almost hear children laughing, merchants shouting, water splashing in the great bath, Mira calling his name. It was all gone, but it was all here. He reached the workshop. The roof had long collapsed. Only 3 walls remained, leaning like tired elders. Inside, he found what he didn't expect, a single unbroken seal half buried in dust. He brushed it gently, his hands trembling. The symbol was simple, a bird, wings open. He smiled, not with joy, but with recognition. He remembered carving that bird for Mira on the day she laughed at him for dropping clay on his feet. He closed his fist around the seal, feeling the edges press into his skin. A familiar pain, a familiar comfort. Arash climbed the steps to the highest place in the city, the platform where once priests, merchants, officials stood to watch the heartbeat of Mohenjo-Daro. He stood there now, one man alone over the ruins of a world that once echoed with life. The wind lifted his hair. It carried scents he had forgotten. Wet clay, firewood, boiled grain, Mira's perfume of river jasmine. He breathed deeply, letting the memories wash through him. Then he heard something, so soft he thought it was imagination. A child's laugh. He turned. The plain was empty, but he knew better. Echoes remain long after voices fade. He sat down on the warm stone, the bird seal in his palm. His eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the sun bled into the earth like a final brushstroke. Arash whispered, "We were here." It was not a shout, not a plea, just a truth. He placed the seal beside him on the stone, not buried, not hidden, left for someone, anyone, to find. A gift, a memory, a proof. The sky darkened. The stars emerged, ancient and steady, just as they were when he was young. Arash closed his eyes, not to forget, but to rest. The wind moved through the ruins. The river far away murmured its eternal song. The Indus Valley Civilization, mysterious, brilliant, silent, lived on in the man who remembered. And in the seal, he left behind for the world to find. Centuries passed. The wind carried away the footprints. The river carved new paths. The earth folded the ruins beneath layers of dust. But the silence did not last. One morning, thousands of years later, a group of archaeologists brushed sand from a stone and froze. A wall, a staircase, a perfect urban grid from a time when the rest of the world still wandered. They uncovered more. Streets aligned with precision, public baths, granaries, workshops, wells descending deep into the ground like veins of an ancient creature. Then came the seals, hundreds of them, carved with symbols no one could read. Animals, patterns, lines, curves, a script that whispered but never spoke. The scholars held the seals in their hands and felt the weight of a lost world. Who carved these? What did they mean? Why did the Indus civilization disappear? The same questions Arash once carried now echoed in university halls, in conferences, in archaeological fields baked by the sun. Scientists argued, historians debated, linguists stared at the symbols until their eyes blurred. No one could decipher the language, not yet. Some said the writing was economic. Others said it was poetic. Some believed the symbols were prayers to forgotten gods. Others claimed they were names of people who left no graves. And in the middle of this modern confusion, someone uncovered a single seal buried deeper than the rest, a bird with wings open. Its surface was cracked as if time itself had once tried to break it. The archaeologist held it up to the light. For just a moment, the sun illuminated the fracture. A spark, a glimmer, a hint of something long gone. She whispered, "We were here." And her colleagues smiled, not knowing those were the same words spoken by a man long forgotten by history. The seal was placed in a padded box, cataloged, numbered, photographed. But its true story, its human story, remains unwritten. Because some civilizations do not speak through words. They speak through echoes, through ruins, through symbols, through the people who wonder. And perhaps that is why the Indus civilization still captivates us, not for what we know, but for what we don't. For the questions that remain unanswered, for the mysteries that refuse to fade, for the silence that feels less like absence and more like presence. The Indus did not vanish. It waits, in the dust, in the stones, in the seals, in the questions, waiting for us to finally listen.